Okay. So it's now 9:33. I think we can start with the webinar. Yeah, we have still one person missing, but we will join. So, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see my screen, and this is my official welcome to this AW Drones webinar. Thank you for joining. I see that people is still connecting. They are still connected, but they will lose nothing important if they connect in 10 minutes, because I will start with a very introductory presentation. Okay, this is from this side. Who is speaking is Damiano Taurino. I am the project coordinator of this AW Drones project. And from me and the staff that maybe you can contact with questions and so today, a very warm welcome to you to this event, to this webinar about the project and about our activities. So I hope everything is doing well with the tool, with this GoToWebinar. As you can see on your screen, you can ask questions, then I will explain better how to interact with us. But in general, if you are experiencing, I don't know, bad audio or something is not going well, you cannot hear us, you cannot see us, and so please drop a question in the tab, and we'll try to sort it out somehow. So once again, welcome to what? To our second workshop. So the second workshop of this AW Drones project. And this specific workshop, as you will know, because I think that the theme is of interest for all of you, is the technical standards to support the EU space implementation in Europe. Okay. So I was supposed to be in this presentation with the project officer, Vladimir Cid-Bourié. He could not join for the moment, but no problem, as he will join, we'll be able to hear from him a couple of words as well. So the first questions that will come to your mind, I think for the ones of you that doesn't know the project, is what is this AW Drones? AW Drones stands for Airworthiness for Mass Market Drones. And this is a European project. It means that the project is co-funded by the European Commission through the very large research program called Horizon 2020. I think most of you know about it. It's the largest European research framework program. We have likely received this funding. And when I talk about we, I'm talking about the consortium of this AW Drones project that is led and coordinated by me and by us in Deep Blue, that is an Italian company working in the field of aviation since the last more or less 20 years, and with a lot of organizations coming from Europe. We will not go in the presentation of everyone who is in the consortium, but if you reach the website, you can have more information about this. You will see some of us in the consortium presenting today, and you can interact with us during the workshop. Okay, I think that okay, we can skip the part that was supposed to be presented by Vladimir for the moment, but he will have time to present INEA and their vision of the research projects in drones when he will be able to connect. Okay, so we have very briefly introduced the project, because in the next presentation, my colleague Marco will tell you a lot of things about the project. So now let's focus on the second part. So what is the workshop and what is the objective behind this? Okay, as regarding this workshop that then became a webinar for the reasons that I will tell you, this is an occasion that we have to talk and show our results to you as stakeholders. Then I will tell you which are our main objectives for this workshop webinar and what you can get from this. So the other keyword is second. So what about the first workshop? The first workshop was held last year in Eurocontrol Brussels in presence. And it was the main objective, the topic of that workshop was drone operation in the specific category. As you can see, we were a lot of smiling people stuffed together in the Eurocontrol premises in Brussels, and looking at this picture looks like being more or less 1 century ago, because we could stand one close to the other, we could shake hands, we could have lunch together at the canteen and so on. Okay, so now this is impossible, so you have been invited remotely to this. Okay, we cannot meet and greet and shake our hands, but on the other side, the good thing is that we can host even a wider audience, because we don't have any limitation of rooms and so on. Okay, the last data I have about the participation to the workshop. Okay, I see that the number is rising of people joining, but the last registration I saw yesterday was more than 300 people coming from 37 countries all over the world, in all the continents and so on. And we have representatives of more than 230 organizations rising from universities, corporation, private organization, or even agencies of the EU and so on. So very good to know that 300 of people registered. Now I see that we have more or less 200 of them already joined. We are waiting for the others, and they're not missing anything special for the moment. The second good thing is that you don't need to travel around Europe to produce CO2 and to pollute the world, and you can still, and you can wear your pajamas, slippers, you can cuddle your cat and whatever you want to do during the webinar. So that's good to know. Before you ask, unfortunately we cannot deliver you the coffee during the breaks, but we are working on this. Okay, is it possible to deliver the coffee by drones? Yes, it is possible. And here this link demonstrates that someone in Switzerland is already doing this. So maybe for the next workshop you will have a drone entering your window, and it's a bit scary. Okay, so the objectives for today are for us to provide you an overview of what we are doing in the project. That is very important for us, and to present you the preliminary results of the technical standard collection and classification. That is the main activity we are doing in the project, and the next presentation will explain you quite in detail what does it mean, and also how these standards are mapped with the requirements, and especially the regulatory requirements for the EU space in Europe. Okay, then another thing that we want to do with you is to gather your feedback to steer future activities and align them with your expectations as stakeholders. Okay, what instead you can get from us is we hope a wider awareness about EU space regulation state of the art in Europe, and we have also some very good invited speakers that will help you to understand this. What's going on with the standardization in the field of drone in general, and with a special focus on EU space? What's the roadmap for R&D of EU space services in Europe? You will have also an early access to the results of our survey that we did last year, and was about the topic of the first workshop. So not specifically EU space, but rather the SORA, so the specific risk assessment methodology for drones. And then you can know more about our main product as a project, that is the Drone Standards Information Portal. Okay, so how do we go on for the day? So please make yourself comfortable, okay, and relax and enjoy the day. That is actually half a day, so don't worry. You can ask questions whenever you want during the webinar. You have a specific tool for questions. I think for all of you it's quite intuitive how to use it. If you are not able to make questions, you can even send an email to Vera, that I will present later on. The questions will be answered at the end of each presentation or at the end of the day. Obviously, it will depend on the timeline and so on. At the end of the workshop, in the case we were not able to answer all the questions, but anyway, in any case, we take the list of the answer. We will anonymize it, so your name as a question will not be published, and we publish it on the website. So even if your answer is not answered today, in few days you can find a list of questions and the respective answer on the website. All the material we are going to present today will be made freely available on the website. So there's no need to take pictures to the screen or take notes or record anything else. We are supposed to publish all the things you see on the screen, and it depends on the quality, maybe also a record of the full day. It depends also on the quality of the video that will come out. Even if a question comes to your mind after the end of the webinar, you can drop us a line. We will give you a lot of references to contact us, so you will have the opportunity to ask for more information. This is the agenda for today. So this very brief welcome and introduction. When Vladimir Cid-Bourié will join, we can leave him a couple of minutes to present what is missing now. Then Marco, my colleague and the person that is coordinating the project with me, will give us an overview of the project. Then we'll have Mr. Nicolas Eertmans from the DG Move agency, the DG Move directorate, that will give us an insight of the regulatory framework ongoing on EUSpace in EU. Then Eurocontrol, Mr. Andrew Aitley, will give us an insight on the R&D perspective, so how Eurocontrol is developing the ConOps of EUSpace and so on. And Mr. Christian Schleifer from EUSCG will give us a view of how EUSpace standardization activities are going on in Europe and at a global level. Then a brief coffee break without drones knocking to your windows. Then Mr. Andres von Swalm from Unifly and member of the consortium will give us an insight of what we are effectively now doing with the EUSpace standards in the project. And Peter van Blyenburgh, as well from the consortium, will introduce us the survey results of the last survey, the one about the specific risk assessment for drones. And then at the end, we will have this interactive session that will basically be a Q&A session where we will try to satisfy all your curiosities about the project and so on. Now, before we go on, I want to present you also Vera Ferraiolo, that sent you the invitation and is the real engine behind this webinar. She will try to answer as many questions as possible during the webinar, and she will be also of help if you cannot interact through the tool. You already have her email because you received the invitation from her. In the case something is not working and you cannot communicate through the tool, please send her a line via email. And now, okay, that's all from my side. Okay, we will give you our contacts during the project, and so I think that you have also the link in the invitation and so on. I suggest you once again to visit the website because there are plenty of information there, and to also follow us on the Twitter and LinkedIn. So let me see whether there are very No, there are no questions for the moment. So either everything is going very well or very bad. So I will leave the floor now to Marco to present us
Damiano.
the project. Yes.
Hello. Good morning. This is Vladimir. First of all, apologies because I had some connection issues and I was not able to join, but I managed. So yes, we do as you prefer. Either I can shortly present now a couple of slides, so we do it later on.
Yes. I project them because I noticed that I missed. Okay, 1 second. I don't know why I cannot see your presentation, but only 1 second. Okay, so Vladimir, I already introduced you as the project officer from INEA, but now you have 5 minutes to explain better.
Sure,
Okay.
I will be very fast.
You should be able to see now the INEA presentation. Am I right?
I am. Yes, correct.
Perfect.
Thank you very much, Damiano. So good morning, everybody. Once again, and apologies for this late join. But I had some internet issues that might happen. Well, so as Damiano has already introduced, AW project is a coordination sport action that is currently managed by INEA, and I would like to present to the audience very briefly who we are and also what we do in a couple of slides. So most of you might be familiar, but some of the people it's the first time that they hear about the INEA. So the Innovation and Networks Executive Agency, INEA, is a European Commission executive agency basically in charge of the implementation of programs. So the agency makes the implementation happen, and it's actually managing under the delegation of the Commission parts of Connecting Europe Facility Program, the Innovation Fund, and also parts of Horizon 2020. There in the slide you have the budget, so the bigger one is the Connecting Europe Facility with more than 28 billion euros. Then the Innovation Fund with approximately 10 billion euros in the next 7 years, and also the part of Horizon 2020 corresponding to energy and transport, which amounts to more than 5 billion euros. This is all done under the delegation of the parent DGs, so DG RTD, DG Move, DG Energy, DG Connect, DG Clima, which are the policy counterparts in the European Commission, basically drafting the programs and delegating these ones to the implementation in INEA. So we take care of the full project management life cycle, from the call for proposals to the evaluation to the preparation of the grant agreement, the technical and financial follow-up of the projects, and also giving key feedback back to the policy colleagues. Currently, we have more than 400 Horizon 2020 transport projects, AW drones, one among them, and in total for Horizon 2020, and there are more than 800 projects dealing with the fields of transport and energy. Next slide, please. Yes, I'm part of from the aviation team, and as you may see on the left-hand side, in the last 7 years, there has been, let's say, a stable number of topics that have been issued and evaluated by the colleagues, and until this year, we have a total amount of 24 different topics that have dealt with very different areas and topic, basically, and areas that you can see on the right-hand side. And there I highlighted because recently we are increasing our portfolio in urban air mobility, aviation safety, also taking into account the drones and the development of innovative technologies such as ARPAs. Next slide, please. All these projects that might have your interest are basically gather in these publications, so you can have in a snapshot in the areas that they are covering and a brief description of the projects. We have been publishing brochures already in 2017, 2019, and this year the brand new 2020 brochure on towards climate neutral aviation. And also I would like to announce here that this year we'll have a dedicated publication on drones. Next slide, please. And then speaking about drones, you might be aware that due to the 2016 study of CESAR about the unlocking the value for Europe of drones, then this it identified several fields of growth for the evolution of drone demand. As you can see on the right hand side, this was actually one of the milestones to develop the topic that at the end award the project AW drones, which was the airworthiness of mass market drones. Next slide, please. And yes, indeed, as I mentioned, the portfolio that we are managing at INEA dealing with drones, I mean the research and innovation portfolio is increasing. We have already one finished project, morning flight. Then if the slides are circulated, you will have all the links so you can get further information. And currently we have already also 5 ongoing projects, being let's say the first one, AW drones, already far beyond the midterm of the project. And then also this year we launched 4 additional projects dealing with the innovative application of drones to ensure safety in transport, which are research and innovation actions. And very recently we had 2 calls close dealing with urban air mobility, one on the research and innovation action side, so really to develop the technologies, that was MG 3.6, and then another more coordination and support action regarding the deployment of urban air mobility in urban and peri-urban areas. Next slide, please. So now the floor is back to you, Damiano. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to this workshop that already took some time to be prepared. I'm sure that we'll have a very fruitful discussions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. And now we go on with Marco. I think that he can take the floor. Marco, you are muted now.
Sorry. Can you? Oops.
Yes, audio and video work perfectly now.
Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, here we are. I suppose you can also, sorry, see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. My name is Marco Ducci. I am the Deputy Project Coordinator of these AW drones and the R&D Manager for Deep Blue. That is the coordinator of this project. And my role today is to introduce you to the project. So I'm going to quickly present what are our objectives and scope, what is the methodology we are using to collect, categorize, and assess the standards, how we are involving external experts in this work, because we are not doing this in isolation, and what are the outcomes we are producing. In particular, I'm going to present for the first time this drone standards information portal that is going to be the place where all the results produced by the project will be made easily available to everyone. So let's start with let's start with a question. So why are we here? why there is this AW drones project. The reason is that nowadays the regulatory framework for drones, especially for the open and specific categories, is set. However, it is still lacking to some extent a list of what are the recommended industry standards that operators, manufacturers, all stakeholders should use to demonstrate compliance with these requirements. So in order to produce this list and to support EASA actually in publishing this list, we have been starting collecting information about all ongoing and planned activities in the standardization world and evaluate how each standard is possibly covering a given requirement. And of course, this activity is leading to the identification of gaps. So AW drones started 2 years ago as a coordination and support action. And this means that we are not producing any new information. We are simply collecting what is already available. We are assessing it, and we are trying to make this information available in an easier way. So AW Drones is a consortium of 13 partners coordinated by Deep Blue with partners with different expertise. So we have major research centers, we have universities, we have drone manufacturers, we have use space service providers, we have small, medium enterprises. So a wide range of competencies to make sure that the work can be carried out effectively. What are our objectives then? As mentioned, we are collecting information about all the ongoing work in terms of standards at worldwide level. We are doing an assessment of these standards in order to identify which of them are suitable to demonstrate compliance with regulatory requirements and what are the gaps, the bottlenecks, and the work that needs to be done. So we like to call all these a meta standard. So it's like a standard of standards, a way in which people can quickly identify which is the right standard to be used in every condition. So in the end, we want to propose and validate, and by validate I mean review with all involved stakeholders, a set of standards that is suitable for each category of drone operations. And we are not doing this in isolation. We are trying to engage as much as possible with all relevant stakeholders in the drone value chain in order to make our results accepted by the entire community. How are we doing this work? So we are collecting information at first, and we are not starting from scratch. We are using the exceptional work that has been done by the EUSCG, and you will listen to a presentation later on, and the rolling development plan that already contains a huge list of standards, and also a similar work that was done in the US by ANSI. We are complementing this activity by adding additional standards to the list that are coming from different domains, for example, automotive. And then we are doing an assessment. Assessment in terms of aspects such as maturity, such as the coverage of the requirements, but also cost of implementation, because not all standards can be accessible to any kind of operator. So we are then mapping the standards, categorized and assessed with the regulatory inputs. For example, in the first year of the project, we focused on the SORA safety objectives and mitigations. And we are asking ourselves, is the standard adequate? So it's not just a simple question like this. There is a methodology behind. I'm not going to provide the details now, but you can find everything on our website. All the methodology is public. You can download it from our website and get more details if you are interested. In the end, on one side, we are proposing a list of standards as acceptable means to comply with a given requirement. And on the other side, we are identifying gaps and bottlenecks. So the standards that we are proposing are then handed out to EASA for their evaluation, and the gaps and bottlenecks are shared with the standard design organizations for their evaluation. And then we leave the decision and the actions to them. The work we are doing is iterative, meaning that each year of the project we are focusing on a specific topic, but while time progresses, we are always updating the work carried out in the previous years. So in the first year, we focused on SORA. This year, we have been working on standards supporting EUSpace, but we have also updated the work we did on SORA because, of course, standards are progressing very quickly. There are always new standards coming out, new ones published, new work that starts. In the last year of the project, so 2021, we are going more towards the certified category. So, for example, standards that will support the certification specification for light UAS. And of course, we'll update also the work on EUSpace and SORA. Who are our stakeholders? In principle, anyone that is involved in the drone sector is a stakeholder for us. So it's someone that can provide useful inputs to the project. The main stakeholders are, of course, the Commission and EASA, the standard making bodies, people from the civil aviation authorities, but anyone that in general is part of the drone world is, for us, an important stakeholder. Of course, we have a more direct relationship with EASA and DG Move. We are carrying out workshops with their experts to get feedback about our work and to progress in such a way that at the end our results are meeting the expectations of these two main stakeholders. And we have an advisory board with experts from several areas that as well support the project with review and feedback of our activities and results. Moreover, we also involve everybody else by online surveys, and we did one about SORA in the past months that will be presented later on, and we do these public workshops. So once a year, we convene with as much attendees as possible to present our work, to again gather feedback and to make our activities known to the drone sector. Today we are focusing on EUSpace, and there will be an additional workshop next year more focused on the standards for the certified category, let's say. And we have also established, and I mean, I think this is shared thinking, a relationship with the standard making bodies to make sure that we are not duplicating their work in any way, but we are actually trying to promote what they are doing and make sure that in the end standards are used by the widest possible community in the way they are meant to be. This is the timeline of the project. So we started in January 2019. We are now after half of the project. So here, autumn 2020, with the EUSpace workshop. So we have still 1 year ahead of us, a lot of results expected. So stay tuned and you will hear from us in the next months. In terms of outputs, every year we are going to produce a report about the state of the art of the standards, which is going to be a list of standards categorized according to domains and keywords, and also a report containing the mapping between the standards and the regulatory requirement with details about our analysis. So how we actually did this mapping. And you can already find the report for 2020 on our website. The report for 2021 is being developed as we speak and will be available sometimes in January. And finally, probably the main result that we are going to provide is this open repository, as we used to call it. Now you will know it as the Drone Information Standards Information Portal, and this is the actual meta standard. So this is the place where everybody will be able to search through the standards, identify which ones are suitable to support compliance to the regulatory requirements. And I'm going to give you a few more details on this in a moment. So just to give you an idea of the numbers we are talking about, for SORA only, we collected more than 600 standards, and we assessed 300 of them coming from the major standard design organization. And we found out that out of these 300 standards, like 35% can provide full coverage, 55% partial, and some of them no coverage at all. So you can understand that it's a jungle. There are hundreds of standards out there, and it might not be easy to identify which is the most suitable for each condition. This is why we have developed this Drone Standards Information Portal that is accessible starting from today for everyone. It's for free, of course. And the idea is to help people finding their standards in this jungle of hundreds of them. So we understand that it's not easy to know how to relate standards with the applicable rules or the categories of operation. It might be difficult to trace, digest, and consult all this amount of information. So this is why we have developed this web portal to help people in doing this activity. This is the link where you can find the portal, and you can reach it also through our website. However, at the moment, you should be careful in using the information that are there, because we are still completing the data upload and the validation. In the portal, you will never find the complete text of the standards and how to use them. For this, you will need to refer to the official websites of the standard design organizations where you can purchase the standards and use them how you intend to. Finally, keep in mind that at the moment, all the information presented in the portal represent the view of the project. So there is no endorsement by EASA or any other regulatory body about the mapping you can find there between the standards and the requirements. However, the information you find there is the same information that has been delivered to EASA for their internal evaluation. So once EASA will publish their official list of recommended standards, of course, this will be clearly reported in the portal as well. Now, just to give you an idea of how the portal works, this is the home page. So you have the list of all standards, and of course, you can search through them in different ways. So one way is to do it by requirement. So for example, here on the left columns, you have all the operational safety objectives and mitigations that you have in SORA. So you can filter by that, and you get the standards that are recommended. You can filter by domain. So there are several domains, for example, initial airworthiness, personnel, aerodromes, operations, and so on. You can filter by keywords. So each standard is associated to a number of keywords, one or more. And so you can select all standards that are classified according to a given keyword. finally, you can also do an open search. So you can search with any text you like. So there are different ways to interact with the information. Once you click on a given standard, you will find a few details, a description of the standard, and a small table that tells you to what extent that standard can support the demonstration of compliance to a given, in this case, operational safety objective of SORA. So this is what the portal will provide. There will be also collaborative tools. They are not available at the moment, but they will be in the future. So users that will register will be able to provide comments and suggestion of any kinds, and then there will be administrators of the tool that will take these comments in account if relevant. So this is it on my side. You can continue following us on our website or on Twitter and LinkedIn. So if you want to know more and you want to be keep updated about what we are doing, you can easily follow us. So I don't think there's time for questions now, but we will answer them in the Q&A session at the end. So thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, I think this is it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you. Nicola, do you confirm that you want me to share your presentation?
Yes, but I just sent you an update a couple of minutes ago.
Okay, 1 second. I can take it. Okay, so I will show you it on the screen, and please tell me when I'm not perfectly aligned with your speech so that I know that I need to change slide. Okay, you now should see it. Do you confirm, Nicola?
Yes, thank you. So is that the one I just sent you? Yes, indeed. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So first, a word caution. This presentation is about a work in progress. So the presentation will cover the draft regulatory framework for EUSpace. We had a second discussion meeting in the EASA committee of last week, but it's not the end of the road. There will be further discussions in the frame of the EASA committee in December. And the earliest we could, we envisage to go for a vote is beginning of 2021. So we are not talking about something which is frozen yet. So what is EUSpace? EUSpace is basically the European version of UTM. It's a UAS traffic management solution. It's a set of services provided in a piece of airspace to support the routine operations of drones. The current existing regulatory framework for drones, which is going to enter into force by the end of the year, enables drone operations and potentially any type of drone operations. But if we want to enable routine operations, frequent operations of drones in a complex airspace, we need some sort of traffic management solutions, and that's what EUSpace is about. EUSpace is, unlike ATM, based on always-on internet connectivity of drones and service providers. So we are talking about services provided over the internet, or at least an always-on connection, whether it's cellular or satellite connection. And we are likely not going to look into replicating what we have in the traditional ATM with dedicated aeronautical telecommunication networks. It's a blooming area, so the EUSpace regulatory framework is in development, but we have a number of pioneer implementation happening in Europe. It is also the topic of ongoing R&D, so it's a challenge between enabling initial operations and also remaining flexible as further topics are being refined. So what we are going to see in the coming slide is the minimal regulatory framework which is currently being developed. It's really a minimal framework which aims to enable an initial implementation of USpace. It's technology neutral, but it will likely need to evolve in the future to address more advanced use cases. Next slide, please. Whoops, I think you can go to the previous one. Yeah. Whoop.
It goes on automatically. Please
It
give
goes
me
on
1 second.
Gosh.
Okay. I think we can show it this way.
Sorry. Yeah, that's what happens when you create presentations from bits and pieces coming from everywhere.
1 second.
So yeah, show it like this. I mean, okay, great. Show it like this. Sorry. So the regulatory framework is based on different parts. So we have in the gray part there in the middle the main regulatory framework, which is about the designation of USpace airspace, provision of common information services, obligations on US operators, on USpace service providers, etc. And then we have other bits that are part of the package. We have some changes to 373/2017, which is regulation dealing with common requirements on the provision of air traffic services. And we have some provisions in there to cover the obligations that are on the air traffic service providers. So although the air traffic service providers themselves will not provide USpace services to UAS operators, there are some obligations in terms of coordination between USpace service providers and air traffic service providers, for instance. So we do have some obligations there. We also have some changes, proposed changes to SORA, the standardized European rules of the air, to introduce electronic conspicuity for manned aviation. So again, USpace is primarily about providing USpace services to UAS operators, but in the case that manned aircraft in particular need to enter USpace airspace in uncontrolled airspace, then there is an obligation for themselves to be electronically conspicuous, to share their position in a manner which is usable by USpace service providers to ensure the safety of the operations in USpace airspace. And then we do also have some changes in the CES2 plus recast, which is the whole regulatory framework defining the single European sky, and that's mostly to address pricing aspects. The reasons why we go for such a puzzle approach is that for legal reasons, not everything could be put in the main regulation on USpace, which primarily deals with USpace service providers and US operators. But hopefully by developing all those amendments in a coherent and consistent manner, we have a coherent package at the end. Next slide. Okay. So the way the USpace regulatory framework was built by EASA and then with the support of the Commission in the later stages was to demonstrate, was to let's say, develop a safety argument that operations in USpace airspace would be acceptably safe. So it addressed airspace design by putting obligations on member states to define the required performances, for instance, in USpace airspace. We do have some obligations on air traffic service providers to dynamically reconfigure the airspace to react to manned traffic demands in the controlled airspace, and that's what is being dealt with in the amendment to 373, so the common requirements on air traffic service provisions. We do have obligations of electronic conspicuity of manned aircraft in uncontrolled airspace, and this is to to make sure that general aviation entering U-space airspace in uncontrolled airspace would be visible to U-space service providers, and as a knock-on effect to UAS operators, and UAS operators can avoid manned traffic. And finally, we do have provisions on USSP's certifications, which are basically following the same approach as for air traffic service providers. Of course, those provisions are proportionate to the risk of the operations, so the U-space service providers will not be subject to the exact same certification requirements, but it's basically the same organizations and requirements and the same nature. So the next slides will cover a bit more into the details of some aspects of the U-space regulatory framework. So one thing which was debated quite a lot in the last month was the organizations of the common information services. What we refer to as common information services is a bit similar to aeronautical information, if you want. It's basically the set of information that needs to be available by air traffic service providers, U-space service providers, US operators for a piece of airspace to be able to safely operate that piece of U-space airspace and have a common, let's say, common information, common understanding of the required performances, the geographical extent of the airspace, and also the traffic which is being operating in that piece of airspace. There was a big push from some stakeholders for a centralized approach to that, and having really a monopolistic service provider providing that information. However, after discussions with EASA, the latest position of the Commission is that there is no compelling safety argument for a single centralized and monopolistic service provider. Instead, the NSP, the air navigation service providers, and the U-space service providers would provide part of the common informations, and then they are already certified. And the member states and the authorities provide the rest of the common information. It's really similar to aeronautical information in nature, and they do not need to be certified. So there we would go for a distributed approach, distributed responsibility of the common information. So a single piece of information would not be provided by different stakeholders, but the information, the elements of the common information would be provided each time by the data originator. And that, of course, if we go forward with that approach, has implications in terms of standardization. The standards would need to support a distributed model, and you will, of course, need to have standards and mechanisms allowing for the discovery of those services and the consumption of those services in a distributed manner, as opposed to having a fully centralized system. Next slide, please. So this is trying to put that into a schematic view. So you have common information services provided by the authorities, the air traffic service providers, or the U-space service providers, and this collectively is referred to as common information services that can be consumed by air traffic service providers, U-space service providers, and even UAS operators. I mean, UAS operators could consume common information, for instance, to know what are the U-space service providers providing services in a piece of U-space airspace, and at what terms and conditions they would provide those services. Then, I would say to support the live operations in the U-space airspace, you have the exchange of operational data between air traffic service providers and U-space service providers, like you have today between operational stakeholders in the manned aviation world. But you also have the provision of U-space services from U-space service providers to UAS operators. So all those arrows, exchanges, flows of information will have, of course, to be standardized. Next slide, please. In terms of U-space services, the current draft regulation defines a number of services, 6 if I remember well, but only 4 of them are currently proposed to be mandatory everywhere. So the list of required U-space services and the required U-space services performances will be the result of an airspace risk assessment that need to be done by the authorities. This opens the question as to whether we could go for only network identification, which is really the pure minimal service for US operators to be identified by use-based service providers. Could that be the only minimum required service? But on the other hand, we do not assume, we do assume that use space is only going to be created where there is a need for traffic management. We don't expect use space to be created everywhere. We also need to have aim for a certain level of harmonization, first to support the free movement of US operators and use-based service providers, but also to support safety. And a certain level of harmonization reduce the risk of heterogeneous type of operations and mistakes, operational mistakes. So as I would say initially proposed by EASA in their opinion, we would propose to keep the network identification, the GEON service, the flight authorization service, and the traffic information services as mandatory use-based services. So those would need to be standardized, of course, but we have defined two more services in the draft regulation, which are the weather information service and the conformity assessment services. So those would, in principle, need to be standardized as well, and that does not, of course, prevent further services to be defined down the line. Next slide, please. I mentioned all that already. There is an impact on mine navigation. So I would say the principle in use space, and at least in the initial implementation of use space, remains that we segregate manned and unmanned traffic for safety reasons, at least in the initial stage. But we would allow general aviation, for instance, to enter use-based airspace in uncontrolled airspace. And the condition for allowing that to happen safely is for manned aviation to be electronically conspicuous, and so to be visible from use-based service providers. And there we go for a technology-neutral, performance-based approach. And again, that's an area where standards will be needed, but we are open to recognize different means of compliance there. And I think solutions such as Swalm, for instance, are considered as good candidates. So we are not necessarily going for a transponder mandatory zone where we will require an ADSB or modest transponder. So that's not the idea. Next slide, please. And yes, last slide, I believe, is on the annexes. So we have fairly high level requirements in the regulation itself, but a number of them are supported by slightly more detailed annexes. You have Annex 1, which is about criteria for the definition of capabilities, performance requirements, operation conditions, and airspace constraints. So when the member states have to do an operational risk assessment for a piece of airspace, as a result of that risk assessment, they will come up with performance requirements for the use-based airspace. And Annex 1 is giving some criteria to define those performance requirements. But there, of course, there will be further guidance materials, AMCs, and potentially standards need to be developed. Annex 2 is about the publication of the common information. So there, again, most likely web-based standards, and we are really hinting at publication of the common information and web services on internet. So we are likely going to have standards that are linked to web-based applications. We have Annex 3 with data quality requirements that's modeled according to the existing data quality requirements that exist for data originators. So those standards may not be specific to use-based service provision, we'll see. Annex 4 deals with US flight authorization requests, so this could be part of the standardization of the US flight authorization service. Annex 5 deals with the exchange of information between air traffic service providers and EU-space service providers. So essentially live operational data. And finally, Annex 6 is a template for certification that probably doesn't need to be standardized. We just have a template in the annex that's probably sufficient for the compliance with the provisions of the regulation. And that, I believe, is the last slide, Damiano. Yes, indeed. So hopefully that gave you an overview of the developing EU-space regulatory framework. As you can see, it's a work in progress, but quite a few areas that will benefit from standardization efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I already saw that your presentation raised some curiosity on the audience because there are a couple of questions. So now I'm asking you whether you plan to be with us until the end.
Yes, well, it depends what it means, but I think 1 o'clock was...
Half past 12, it will be the Q&A session. So if
okay,
you
no, I can still be there, yeah.
Perfect.
So that I think it's battery, but yeah.
Okay,
no
so I already saw that there are a couple of questions for you. So thank you. And okay, now we give the floor to Mr. Andrew from Eurocontrol. I don't know whether you can take yourself the lead or Vera try to put because I cannot change directly now.
Okay. Do you?
Yeah. Yes.
You see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. I introduce myself. I'm Andrew Haitley. I am a researcher working in Eurocontrol, and I'm going to describe a piece of work that was done. It finished just over a year ago, which defined a concept of operations for EUSpace. This work was partly an input to what Nicolas has just presented. It has a slightly larger scope. And I'm also going to try to put this work in context and describe what other research has been related to this. And then I'll finish with a word about implementation. So the Chorus project was an exploratory research project. We had 9 member organizations. We had an advisory board with 21 members, and then we had a large stakeholder community who supported the work. We had more than 100 organizations taking part in other research projects, sibling projects we called them, and we had more than 500 stakeholders who contacted the project and took part in our activities. We had some workshops at which they helped us. And what was the project about? We wanted to develop a concept of operations for EUSpace which would be durable. We wanted to describe now what the situation would be when the traffic was extremely dense. And we wanted to do this because we wanted to produce a concept of operations which would be robust. We didn't want something that would need to be reworked as the level of traffic rose. So the thinking behind the concept of operations is that there will be a lot of traffic and a lot of operations. We were open to steal the best ideas from around the world and take inputs from stakeholders because our aim was to produce something which achieved consensus. We wanted something that would be used rather than seemed perfect to a small group of people. The basis of the project was 3 large workshops, each attended more than 100 attendees with a wide range of interests and concerns. And we made 3 iterations of our ConOps, getting feedback from the stakeholders each time. So the basic notion that we came up with was to divide the sky into different volumes. And these volumes would represent areas of different risk, and they would also indicate different access conditions and different services being provided. The 3 types of volumes, X is low risk. This is like everywhere where there's not EUSpace in the terms that Nicolas has just described. Y is the first area where you start to see use-based activity, and access to Y volumes will require an operation plan, and that plan has to be approved before the flight. And there may be specific technical requirements associated with a Y area, requirements about surveillance or equipment carriage or navigational performance, things like that. And then the high risk areas we described as type Z, and in type Z there would be tactical conflict resolution, and we saw there as being two types of type Z. There are those where the control is by ATC, current ATC, and there were those where everything would be managed by U-space. So a quick word about conflict resolution. So in the X volumes, there's no conflict resolution, so the pilot remains responsible to remain well clear by eyesight, mostly. In the Y volume, there is an approved flight plan required, and the conflict resolution is done at the level of the plan. So we imagine that under normal situations, we will need to ensure that the plan is followed. There will need to be a conformance monitoring because the only thing we know is that the plans don't collide, so the flights will have to follow their plans. There may be types of Y airspace where the goal of the operation plan is to manage access. For example, at a national park, there may be no requirements once the flight is underway because the flight is effectively alone when it occurs. And in the type Z airspace, we see conflict resolution before the flight, but also during the flight, so a tactical conflict resolution. And this will require tracking, and the performance of the tracking and the navigation abilities of the aircraft will determine the separation minima which are used in the Z volume. So you could have Z volumes where the aircraft are widely spaced because that's all the technology will allow, or you can have Z volumes where the aircraft must be fitted with more precise equipment, but it allows closer spacing and higher density operations. So the whole network of use-based services are shown here. They are described in the blueprint document as being introduced in different phases. U1 were the initial phase of basic services. Registration had to be set up and things like that. U2 is where we get enough services going to begin to enable beyond visual line of sight operations. And U3 we see as being the enabler for higher density activity. And the legislation that Nicolas was talking about is really the gateway to U2. So I can talk for any length of time, up to an hour or more, about this page, but I'll be fairly brief. We focused in the Chorus project on safety critical activity. There will be many other use-based services which are of more business interest rather than safety interest. So this page is a set of the safety services, and they in the CONOPS are described in detail, and we've grouped them here to show the logical relationship between some of them. Okay, skipping forward, a quick overview of what's in the CONOPS. So there's a lot of consideration about safety. We looked at the interrelationship of the different means of separation. We talked about safety assessment. There are some examples of how U-space will support the mitigation actions required by SORA. There are two worked examples given in the CONOPS. We also describe a method for U-space safety assessment which has a much broader scope than SORA. SORA is really only about looking at specific operations in isolation, whereas Medusa has a much larger scope. It's described in the CONOPS and is available for your use. There's also discussion about event reporting and failure events, contingency methods. There's some sections which put forward best practices, proposals, and ideas about how they might be maintained. There's a section on social acceptability. We wanted to produce a CONOPS in which drone operation would be accepted by society. We didn't quite have the funding or manpower to completely finish that task, but we did produce a set of indicators for social acceptability, which we propose and are available for your use. We also talked about the deployment architecture, and this architecture that we propose is in line with what Nicolas has mentioned, although one or two of the terms have now changed, but the basic ideas are there. The CONOPS is available at the link in blue at the bottom of the page. So when you get this document after the event, you can go and look for it if you want to read it. So where does the CONOPS fit? So at the time we were working was the SESAR joint undertaking exploratory research call number 3. And that consisted of 9 research projects. The Chorus CONOPS was built by inputs from the other 8 and was to be used by the other 8. So these 8 projects looking at different aspects of UAS operations and safety negotiated with us to produce a CONOPS that they could apply. And then shortly after the exploratory research call, there was a series of very large demonstrations started. And again, we were in a negotiation phase with these 10 projects. They were trying to use our CONOPS and giving us feedback about things which were helpful or not helpful. So the Chorus CONOPS has had a certain amount of validation. And there will be a webinar next week which describes that, actually. The Chorus project is finished. Oops, sorry, wrong way. The Chorus project is finished. So now the CONOPS is kind of frozen until we get an opportunity to update it. And it is the standard concept of operations for SESAR projects. So it's been absorbed by a number of projects in the exploratory research wave 4 and some coming very large demonstrations. So as I say, there's a webinar next week if you're interested. There will be an analysis presented of these 19 projects and some conclusions drawn. Okay, a quick word about deployment. So some parts of USpace are already in the regulations, registration, for example, and there are mandates to start to deploy these things. Some colleagues of mine in Eurocontrol are running an annual survey on the deployment, and you can download copies and see what's going on. The survey is towards the end of each year, so they're currently performing the one for this year. So if you look at the version which you can download, you might think this is a little bit out of date, but there'll be an update coming soon. And as Nicolas said, there's a USpace regulation expected next year, and that will unleash a great wave of deployment. There is a whole load of stuff people are ready to do, but cannot do until the regulation describes the precise details that they need to follow. And the other thing which is ongoing is research. We're still looking at aspects of USpace which need to be refined. The CONOPS said broadly how some things would work, but didn't talk about the details. There's a project called Bubbles, which is looking at the separation management service. And it is refining this idea that is mentioned in the CONOPS about the separation distance between aircraft can be different between each pair of aircraft. We no longer have a human air traffic controller in the loop, so we're no longer limited by the cognitive abilities of the controller. So it's possible to optimize the separation distance by making a pairwise consideration each time. Bubbles is looking at that. There's also a project looking at demand and capacity management in U-space. In manned aviation, we have capacity limits again coming from manned air traffic controllers. The sky is divided into sectors. Sector has an executive controller. This executive controller has a limited mental capacity. At a certain point, he just can't deal with any more aircraft. So this sets the capacity for sectors, and there's a great activity in managing the traffic so that this capacity is not exceeded. There is a similar limit in capacity in U-space. Although we will have a tactical separation service which is driven by an automatic means, it is still based on predicted data. We extrapolate the paths of the aircraft and consider when they might collide. And this is a process which contains errors. So there is always, in tactical conflict resolution, there's always a residual risk which is not being managed. And when these residual risks combine to produce an unacceptable level, then capacity is reached. And DACUS is looking at that problem and how demand can be limited to the available capacity determined by a safety budget. There's a project called FACT, which is looking at CNS technology. There's a lot to be done in terms of surveillance and communications. Mostly the problems stem from the number of drones and the low altitude. If we fit ADS-B to drones, the aircraft are flying too low to be picked up by the existing receivers. We would have to carpet Europe in ADS-B receivers, and then we would saturate the radio channel ADS-B uses. So that's not really a useful approach. So there are many other things to look at in CNS before we can achieve the drone activity that we would like to. The project Icarus has picked up the previously ongoing work on the common altitude reference. We need to understand the height at which drones are flying to solve three problems. One of them is so they don't hit buildings or hills. Another one is so they don't hit each other. And the third one is so they don't hit manned aviation. Manned aviation is measuring its altitude using atmospheric pressure. And on most small drones, due to the wash from the rotors, it's not feasible to even measure atmospheric pressure. So quite some work to do there. And there are some other projects ongoing. INVERCAT will look at how to manage remotely piloted aircraft in the TMA zone. And there's a project called You Are Cleared, which is attempting to produce remain well clear function for use for drones flying above U-space in the class G airspace. There are projects ongoing funded by other bodies that will influence the design and performance of U-space, and I would indicate two. There are many, but I'll indicate two. There's SUGUS, which is looking at how the performance of enhanced GNSS will influence U-space services, particularly going back to this issue about separation. How well do we know where the drones are? How closely can we put them together? What are the uncertainties? And a project called Labyrinth, which is looking at swarming as something which can be pre-planned. A very interesting project that might yield some quite useful output. There are also some projects which are coming. There have been a number of calls which have been answered, and there are some projects still writing their grant agreements, so we don't normally talk about them when they're in that phase. But there's more stuff coming in exploratory research. There's a Wave 3 project which will look at the interface between U-space and air traffic management, ATC. And there are some very large demonstrations coming, at least two of which will look at the influence of urban air mobility on U-space and the needs for services in U-space to support urban air mobility. So that's the end of my talk today. I'll plug again this webinar if any of you are available on the morning of the 12th. We'll give an overview of the work that's been done up to now, and we'll show the common results of this program of use-based research projects. The end.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrew. And can you confirm as well that you will be with us until the end of the session, so that if we find questions and so we can refer to you?
I'll be around until 1, yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so now I leave the floor to Christian, that is our last speaker before the break, before our well-deserved coffee. So Christian Schleifer, please, I don't know, Vera, can you make him a speaker? Because I cannot anymore.
Yes, just a second.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Damiano, for the introduction. Okay.
Did it work?
Send it. Oh yeah, hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay. Does it work? So you have the
Yes.
full screen? Very good, very good. So thanks again. And let me take this opportunity, because Andrew made a very good presentation on the R&D activities, that we bring a little bit into perspective how this whole flow goes from an R&D activity. Then we call that the industrialization phase, where when out of the R&D activities, there are some validation results, there are some results coming out, which are very often the input for standardization work, but also for the regulatory frame. And also, I want to make this comparison. That's the reason it's very important what you're doing here in your project. Standards should complement the regulatory frame. As you mentioned already, you are recommending to EASA what are the standards which can be used as an acceptable means of compliance. Sure, at the end, that's the EASA's responsibility to accept those standards, or note those standards, or list those standards as an acceptable means of compliance. And at the end, we have the deployment. So the deployment, then we hand over the regulatory frame. There is a frame available, there are standards available, you can implement and you can roll out. But the industrialization phase also has one important factor, the industrialization itself. So there are products at the end. So before we have an R&D activity, there are very good prototypes and validation exercise, but then you have a product at the end. But let me come to our initial topic today, or to the topic today, the EUSCG, and let me introduce quickly EUSCG, the European Unmanned Aircraft System Standards Coordination Group. So as the name says already, it's a standards coordination group. We coordinate with the regulator, with the regulatory frame, what kind of standards we have, and we try to map them. And how we do that, Marco has already given a little bit an outlook on that. There is a so-called rolling development plan. So on the 1st of June 2017, we had the kickoff meeting. So the first meeting taking place of the EUSCG. This is 3.5 years back now. In the meantime, we had 13 meetings of this group, and we have the 5th edition of the rolling development plan published already. So the latest meeting took place in September, and since the establishment of the AW drone project, Marco participated in most of the meetings as well. So there is already a coordination going on. This coordination group is based on the European Commission initiative. We also have to say that this was not the first one. It was actually the second one. The first one was initiated by the European Commission in support of single European sky targets. It was called the EUSCG for ATM implementation. And based on this example, we actually built the EUSCG as the next coordination group. So what's the role of this group? So what's the role of this group? So first, coordinate as an advisor to the European Commission, to the regulator, to EASA, and support the regulatory frame, but also link it to regional and other global activities. And you mentioned already there is another regional activity which is done by ANSI, the Unmanned Aircraft System Standards Collaborative, the EUASSC. So that's the American pendant, which was founded, I think, in September 2017. So the EUSCG was so far chaired by Eurocay, by me, and we are currently handing it over to EASA. For us, that's an important step forward, because the EASA, as the regulator certification authority, has a leading role here in making sure, and we're coming back, that the standards should complement the regulatory frame. I think that gives that group an extra power and an extra push in the right direction. You also see here that we have members from the different areas of drones representing the standard developing organizations, which is clear, the different SDOs representing the regulator, in this way here, the European Commission and the EASA. We have the ESOs, which are also standard developing organization, but with a particular role in Europe. But we have also representation from the industry, from the users, from the manufacturer, to make sure that we understand the need and also the priority from the community itself. That's a quick overview and the flow chart, how the system works itself. So stemming from the CESAR ATM master plan, EASA rulemaking program, the EUSCG is feeded, and then it goes into the different standard developing organization. And in the yellow box, you see that's the internal standard developing process of the individual standard developing organization, which could be ASTM, SAE, RTCA, Eurocay, ASD STAN, and all of them you have seen here on the list of members. And then they are feeding back, so they're giving us the feedback, and there is the monitoring of the activity. So it's not only that we look into what's planned in the future, what's already published, it's already the ongoing activity which is observed here. And as I mentioned before, you see also there are interfaces to international and other regional activities to making sure we are working not here in isolation. The Commission here and the regulator has taken here a more global frame, because you see standard developing organization from around the world. It's not only on European-based ones. There are also invited US-based or other international organizations, I think, which gives that a favor, which is not the case in other regions. The ANSI, for example, is mainly focusing on American-based standard developing organizations. The RDP, which is the heart and the main outcome and the main deliverable of this group, is the rolling development plan that first reflects the working group of the different standard developing organizations. Secondly, to identify potential overlaps and gaps. You can imagine that our resources are not endless, and that the industry and the experts, if you want to have a good experts, make sure that you use the time, the resources efficiently and effectively. So we try to avoid overlaps as much as possible. Standard developing organizations have, with most of the other standard developing organization cooperation agreements, to make sure that they are working together. Very often that reflects, and if you allow me to take Eurocay as an example here, so we do 50% of our activities jointly with RTCA. So if there is some kind of overlap, we try to join the forces here. If there are other overlaps, we make sure that there is one organization talking to the other, so that we are not duplicating the work. But it's also here to identify gaps, so that the rolling development plan is done based on a need and a specific need you might have. You can map this plan with your needs, so that you can do a gap analysis. We also to address some difficulties you might have. and that could be, if you give an example, if a standard is not, if you don't have the resources, or there is a delay in something, that we also identify some time constraints and some deferrals in the deliverable of a standard. That makes it also important that those who have to implement that, to deploy that, have a good understanding if there is a potential deferral in a deliverable. And then identify technical inputs also from other organizations. You might have seen not all organizations are actively participating, but ICAO, for example, is something we are looking also as the EUSCG, and if there are inputs available, that we are taking that on board. The other interface we have was with the AW drone, and as Marco mentioned already, we made sure that this was provided to the AW drone project, so that they have a basis to start with. And you can find there is a dedicated website, www.euscg.eu, where you can find the rolling development plan. The rolling development plan is for free. You can register yourself. That also means that you get a push message if there is a new rolling development plan published. It also means you don't have to go actively and look for a new version. You get notified for that. So how is the structure here, and to focus a little bit on what we have in mind today on U-Space. So we separated that in different domains, or structured that in different domains, and one of the domains is UTM, U-Space here. Then you have the regulatory side. So on the regulatory side, you have the regulation, the article description, the organization publishing that could be the Commission, could be EASA. The publication target itself of the regulation, because very often we work already with an MPA or something like that, where we have already some kind of indication in which direction it might go. And then the applicable US category and the status itself of this regulation. Is it in draft? Is it published? What status does it have? And on the very right side, you see the applicable standard. So what kind of standard is it? A short description of the standard, the SDO in charge, and I saw a question here, can you identify which standard developing organization is in charge for developing a particular standard? The publication target, so all our standard developing activities are linked with a target date, and we have a plan for that, and that is also periodically updated. The type of document is what kind of standard is it? Minimum operation performance standard, or an OSET, or could be something else. And the standards, and then there might be comments. Because we link a lot of these activities to standards, but there might be also documents which have not the level of a standard, but might be important to know or to understand or to refer to. And those could be documents of all kind of use. So, and those documents we list in the comment section. So we have now seen the domains. If we are in a particular domain, we have different topics. So on the different topics, on U-Space, we see U-Space itself, the e-identification, local e-ident, marking and registration, geo-awareness, and the zone definitions. And then we go already a little bit more in detail on the different references of the regulatory frame, EU regulation, EASA certification specifications, those kind of things. So, and here we have specific links. What I want to mention, especially when we talk about UTM, the US remote identification, the US geo-awareness system, Article 14 of the EU regulation I mentioned above about the US operators registration number and the geographical zones. And on the right side, we go into details and saying, okay, what are the applicable standards? It's an SAE document, it's an ISO document coming from which working group, which body in this organization is responsible. So you see on SAE AS4, on ISO TC20, on ASTM F38, ASD STAN has a particular working group on that, and our EuroK working group is called Working Group 105. with this, that's the current section now, where we have under the topic different standards already listed, and on the very right side you see the status, as I mentioned before. So ongoing means they are still in development, but we see already some of them. Those I put in orange are ongoing, but already past a certain level. The open consultation, for example, or the common resolution process is currently ongoing. But there are several of those already published, and you see them in green. You see what the standard is. It's a technical report. Is it a standard, an information report? Then the target date, and then what group is responsible for. And then on the very left side, you see a short description of the standard itself. So that's the way a standard is. The EUSCG is set up and is listing the different standard, is linked it to the regulatory frame, and that tells you the full story. It's a living document, so normally we meet 3 to 4 times a year to make sure that we have all the current activities implemented in the current rolling development plan and publish it in a timely manner so that we can react quickly on that. Also to understand, as a standard developing organization, where their needs are. So that's the important thing to understand from the industry, where the needs are. Secondly, also to understand from a regulatory perspective where we are going with the regulation, because I always said we want to complement the regulatory frame, so we need to well understand where the regulatory frame is going. But let me mention at the end, it doesn't help us to ask me to develop you a standard because I'm working for a standard developing organization. We, on all the standard developing organization, providing a platform how to develop the standards. In reality, it's you who develop the standards, the experts here, and we have 200 now online. That's really important to convey this message. It's really done when we need a standard, we need the expertise from outside. It needs to come from those who know where they want to go, operational wise, technology wise. We're not standardizing the technology, but we are standardizing minimum operation performance standards, for example. And that's the important thing. We need to have the workforce available to get those standards in a way and in a time frame to suit the whole project and the whole implementation of USpace here. With this, I'm finished, and I was in between the coffee break and the other speakers, so not a very good position. I didn't feel very well, but I think we made it with a bit of delay. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you, Christian. We are ahead, 10 minutes ahead, and it's a very good outcome. So thank you very much. All of you have been very precise, and so thank you for this. So I would say that now it's time for coffee. We come back at 11:30. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Andres, we can see your screen now. So I hope that you. Yes, perfect, Andrew.
Okay.
Andres, sorry. I can hear you, and the screen is perfect. Okay. So okay. I hope you all enjoyed your coffee and second breakfast of the day. And now I'll leave the floor to Andres from Unifly that will bring us more deeper into the actual work that we are performing now in the project. So please, Andres.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. So my topic, my name is Andres Swalm. I'm one of the co-founders of Unifly, and within Unifly, I'm responsible for the product. So I will tell today about the USpace regulatory framework and the related standards. So first of all, the work we do is actually based on the implementing regulation and the draft USpace regulation, which is actually still in draft, of course, which is being created by Commission in close coordination with EASA. We know that USpace is key for enabling the drone industry. We also know that it will be an open market, and Europe is also talking about two types of services, meaning we have the common information services, we have the USpace services, where the USpace services will be provided by USpace service providers. And USpace services will be provided in an open market by multiple USpace service providers. So with this information, we of course, let's say, started our work. Then we actually had a look, okay, what are now actually the common information services? They will be designated by the member states for every USpace. Then it contains all single trustworthy source of information. We'll see later on what this actually means. And it supports the change of information and coordination between USpace service providers and ATC. The USSPs, on the other hand, they will provide services to drone operators, and they will provide a minimum set of USpace services to drone operators. There are some optional ones. Again, we'll see this later on. Then we had a look, okay, which standardization bodies are actually now defining UTM standards, and we identified 4 standardization bodies, being EUROCAI, ASTM, ISO, and IEEE. From these, EUROCAI is working on 3 related UTM standards, ASTM 4, ISO 5, and IEEE 1. And not all of them are relevant. That's what we'll see in the next slides. So which USpace services did Europe identify? First of all, we have the network identification service. Then we have the geo-awareness service, the UES flight authorization service, the traffic information service, and then there are 2 optional ones, the weather information service and a conformance monitoring service. So these are the services which will be provided by USpace service providers to drone operators. This resulted in a kind of a high-level architecture which we created, where we see in the top, let's say, we have multiple USSP. So we have USSP X and USpace service provider Y, for example, and they should communicate with each other. And also they should communicate with the common information service, so data needs to be exchanged. Then we have 2 kinds of external data which needs to be exchanged with USpace service provider and common information services. First of all, we have the weather data, and secondly, we have ATM data, mostly, let's say, manned aviation data. Then the USpace services, as what I said, so we see the blue ones, which are the mandatory ones, and the yellow ones are the optional ones. And the common information services, what will they provide? They will actually provide ATM data towards the USpace services and also geo-awareness data. And next to that, which is also related to the dynamic configuration of airspaces, which are quite, could be, let's say, related to the authorization request, for example, inside controlled airspace. So what does it mean? That, for example, if a certain flight authorization request is necessary inside controlled airspace, or we need some dynamic configuration of the airspace, what is needed, that this is communicated to the USpace service provider. So these are, and then we identified 9 data exchange and 9 possible ways where a standard should be applicable. There we actually made a distinction where we say we have a candidate standard, which means the green one. So you will see there are 3 green ones which are possible published candidate standards, orange ones which are possible candidates which are still in development, and red, there are no candidate standards yet. To be sure, we always speak about the candidate standard. So it's not yet that the candidate standard will be able to actually be the standard to be fully compliant with USpace. As a USpace, as what I said, we have based ourselves, let's say, on the USpace draft. The USpace draft also currently evolved. So we're actually currently adapting the documentation based on the latest information, which was actually published quite recently. So we start with the candidate standards. So this the first candidate standards treats about the ATM to use space communication. So it's actually existing manned aviation standards. So if you go back to the architecture, this means the purple block with the common information services. So how could we actually change standards from an ATM system with use space? And there we identified asterisks as a possible mean to actually communicate, which is existing in manned aviation, so which are existing standards which are being used in ATM. Which asterisk protocols we actually support is not yet they are not yet identified. Next to that, weather data as a second one. It's also That's also the one which coming from an external system towards the use-based service provider. There we first identified also, for example, the existing standard WIXM, but we already discussed with multiple providers where WIXM is actually a candidate which was not actually able to support the exchange of data with use-based service providers. Next to that, we also know that ASTM is working on a standard which is still under development, which actually defines exchange of weather data with UTM. So this is a possible candidate. Then the third one, so this relates to the ATM data, which actually being exchanged with the common information service provider. With the use-based service provider, so it's real-time data, for example, manned aviation data, that this should be exchanged with the traffic information service. There is no candidate standard yet which we identified. It should be, I think, asterisk protocol could be one, but it's a dangerous one because it's so dangerous, maybe wrong term. Asterisk is not maybe the most scalable one to actually communicate common information services with use-based service providers. Then the fourth one, the geo-awareness data. On geo-awareness data, there is actually like quite a lot of work is being done over there. We've seen work in Eurocontrol, ISO, and ASTM, and there we identified one very interesting one, which is actually the one which is published by Eurocontrol, which is the one about geofencing, which is also published, and this is a possible candidate. Also, ISO is busy with defining the data model for spatial data, but this is still under development. The same for ASTM. Then we have the dynamic airspace configuration, the flight authorization request, number 5. So this relates to this one, where the flight authorizations, for example, dynamic configuration is being exchanged with the authorization service of the use-based service provider. There we actually haven't identified a candidate standard yet. Number 6, the network identification service. Also here, quite a lot of work is being done by the standardization bodies. We have identified 3, also again, ASTM, Eurocontrol, and ISO. The one from ASTM is actually the most interesting one, which is already published. And actually it's about network remote ID, where data is exchanged with in between multiple use-based service provider through the network. So this is the ASTM. This is, let's say, a possible candidate. Then we have Eurocontrol, which is actually now being in approval state, also candidate, but it's not yet published, so it's still being investigated. And then we have the ISO one, which is still, let's say, under development. So candidate which we identified as the most promising one for to comply with the use-based services is the ASTM one. Then we have communication service. So this is not really like, it's a service which they mention in the use space draft, but it's not really a service which is provided by a common information service or a use space service provider. It's actually, it's an enabler to enable communication. And oh, sorry, that's too far. And there we actually identified ASTM, where they work on the communication service, which they call Discovery. It's a way in how use space service provider are able to communicate with each other, and how they, if communication is established, that they can exchange data with each other. So it's a scalable way on how to exchange data with other use space service provider. So this is a possible candidate which we actually identified for the communication service within use space. Then we have number 8, the flight authorization service. For here, we also had a look at the same ASTM standards which could be quite interesting. So the flight authorization service is everything concerning planning of an operation and so on. And there we actually identified the ASTM standard new specification for service provided under UAS traffic management as a candidate. Then we have the final one, which is the conformance monitoring service, and there we actually haven't identified any candidate yet. So these are the candidate standards which we identified where data exchange is actually required. Now, something which is also very important is the requirements for the use space service providers. It's not about data exchange as such, but it's about requirements for use space service providers. And there we identified that ISO is actually busy with defining a standard concerning requirements for UTM services and service providers, which is still under development. So this is ongoing work. It's and this is actually it. It's ongoing work. It's sometimes quite difficult because the use space draft is still in draft state. So this is actually the current work and the current state of the standards. Any questions?
So Andres, there are a few questions that were asked while you were speaking in writing. So maybe one that you can answer is where the tracking service is in the architecture you just presented, because it's not explicitly mentioned.
The tracking service, you mean the exchange between tracking information between the common information services and the USSPs? If it's that, then it's number 3. So now we go back to sorry, go back to 3.3. That's this one. We actually haven't identified the candidate. Again, the tracking information from ATM to use space, that's where we actually identified asterisks. Now, and this is important, ATM data, ATM with use space. We know that ATM systems are most often, let's say, quite legacy systems. So just making USSPs able to connect to any ATM is quite difficult. And that's also why use space, they define that the SIS, one of the common information services is to provide an interface between ATM and use space service provider. And of course, then of course, there should be data which should be exchanged between ATM and the common information services before they are able to be provided to the use space service provider. And this is about tracking information. This is about the first standard. These are the asterisk protocols which we identified, and then the ones which we haven't identified yet are the ones between the SIS and the USSP.
Okay, maybe we have time for another one. It was asked if you knew about any updates that could be made to the ASTM remote ID standard. So
and
are you
updates? Wait, let's go back. So that's this one. For now, it's quite difficult to know exactly which updates could be made, because again, it's still on draft. The reason why STM is actually like a very good candidate, because it directly describes communication between multiple use-based service providers through a network remote ID. So I'm not sure if we already know that some changes could be made based on the current use-based draft, the state of the current use-based draft.
Okay, thanks.
Any
Okay.
other questions?
If any other question will arise, we can also address them during the final Q&A session. Okay, so don't be shy and write questions, because we will have time at the end. So now it's time for Peter to present the results of the survey about SORA. And okay, I'm presenting. Peter, do you agree that I will show the slides?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is it okay?
Yeah, it's fine for me.
Perfect.
Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. Now, this is a little overview of what we were setting out to do. It should be noted up front that the survey was addressing drone operators. And they were clearly defined what was meant by a drone operator. The survey was also conducted in English, French, German, and Spanish, to optimize the inputs from the operators in Europe. So this, again, it was addressed to operators in Europe. It was split into two sections. There was the UES Ops survey and the Ops risk survey. The first part was destined to identify what we're actually talking about when we speak about operators. In what market sectors are they active, and what type of missions are they flying in those market sectors? We were only addressing flight operations below 500 feet above ground level. It was VLOS, eVLOS, and BVLOS, or a combination of two of those. And it was over densely and sparsely populated areas. The UAS Ops survey had a small section concerning SORA, which was there only to permit us to identify which operators actually knew something about SORA. So they could qualify by participating in that part of the survey, and then they would be invited to take part in the Ops risk survey. Next slide, please. So the methodology used was splitting everything into sections. The first section, the respondent had to declare that he was an operator, in what type of operations he was active, commercial or non-commercial, and then choose the type of operator that he was. And there were 10 options for that. Then he automatically went on into the UAS Ops survey on the current situation. He was able to select 4 market sectors out of 25 in which he was active. And then for each of those 4 market sectors, he could select 5 mission purposes out of a total of 33 that he was flying. This was done for the current situation, and it was also done for the near future situation. Near future is starting the 1st of January 2021 and then up to 2 years forward. Okay. And then the next section was the initial feedback on SORA, which would then qualify the person or not to participate in the ops risk survey. Those two were much simpler in structure. They were simple yes and no and questions or multiple choice questions, whereas the first two sections were very complicated to put together and actually resulted in Excel sheets with 5,121 columns, which is gigantic. Next one, please. Now, here are the basic numbers of the results of the survey. So there were 247 operators that participated. Out of that, 20 qualified to go on to the ops risk survey. The operators came from 22 countries, and you can see the countries there in alphabetical order and in order of importance. France supplied the majority of the operators, and there were quite a few countries in there with only one operator. Out of all the operators, 188 were commercial operators and 59 non-commercial. Each time when one of these terms was used in the survey, it was clearly defined what is meant by a commercial operator and what is meant by a non-commercial operator. The operator types that participated, you see the quantities indicated there. So very clearly, the corporate entities, of which there were 5 different categories, made up the bulk of the respondents. And then you see the little results on the SORA comprehension, which was the initial part before you went into the ops risk survey, which is totally dedicated to SORA. Next, please. So here we have an overview of the current situation. It was interesting to see that all the proposed market sectors, except one, were actually being selected by the operators. The only one that wasn't selected is policy compliance and legal proof. Out of the in the market sectors, 10 of the 25 proposed market sectors represented 86 of the total, and 10 of those market sectors at the end represented 6% of the total, with the lowest drone activity. So it was very clear that the bulk of the operations were taking place in 10 out of 25 of the market sectors. All the proposed flight missions were actually taking place, but 10 out of the 33 proposed flight missions concentrated 71% of the total amount of flight missions. When we look at the types of missions that the operators were conducting, it was interesting to see that 59% were actually concentrating today, for obvious reasons, on VLOS and eVLOS operations. But what was a surprise was that 41% indicated that they were doing BVLOS operations. Only 9% were flying missions over densely populated areas, 45% over sparsely populated areas, and 46% over a combination of those. So they were actually active in both areas. out of this flowed that there is a widespread recognition of the benefits for the use of drones, but it's very clearly still a budding market, an initial market, principally concentrating on VLOS and eVLOS operations. And there is still quite a bit of room for job creation in all the market sectors. If we can go to the next slide. Now, here we have the same type of information, but now in the near future. We still see that 10 out of the market sectors concentrate 83% of the total operations. Out of the flight missions, the 10 flight missions that are most actively used remain the same. The evolution is quite interesting. You see that there is a decrease in operators flying only VLOS operations by 44%. Only eVLOS operations by 12%. And we see an increase foreseen in the BVLOS operations of 16%. But the combinations that are indicated below all have increases. So there is a clear anticipation that the growth, as the operators see it, is in the future and very definitely in BVLOS. It is not anticipated by the operators that missions over densely populated areas will grow enormously. And the operators over densely and sparsely populated areas, so together doing both, that will increase by 27%. So the conclusions of this is that eVLOS and VLOS will remain of interest to the operators. 39% of them are still going to be doing missions in these areas. And the evolution from eVLOS and VLOS and eVLOS to BVLOS flights is going to be 61% of all the operators. So there's a clear growth there, anticipated growth. The use of safety risk analysis methods will become increasingly important because of the growth towards BVLOS operations. And this obviously will also involve an increase in demand for services from flight training schools. Next, please. So here is an overview of the 10 principal market sectors, and you see where there is growth. You also see that there is, in a number of cases, a decrease. This is probably has to do with the immaturity of the market, that the majority of the operators are still looking to find their actual niche. However, what is very interesting is that when you look at the other growth markets, there is substantial growth in quite a few that are not part of the principal 10 market sectors. Next slide, please. Here we have the principal flight missions. Again, the indications are interesting. What is surprising is that there are decreases in a number of the flight missions, which indicates that the operators are migrating to other missions with probably higher returns, financially more interesting for them. And what is also interesting on the right-hand side is that there is growth in quite a few of the flight missions that are not part of the 10 principal flight missions. Next, please. So the safety risk analysis methods used, this was part of the initial UAS ops survey. We found out that 53% of the respondents have read the SORA, 23% have submitted a SORA, and that 35% are using SORA. However, the safety risk assessment methods used indicate that there are different types of services that are being used to do this. 56% indicated a process approved by the National Aviation Authority of their country. Predefined risk assessment was 7. National standard scenarios, 12. And another method, whatever that could be, 23%. When we look at the quantity of operators using an independent third party for risk assessment purposes to conduct risk assessment, there were 14% that indicated that they were using an independent third party. Again, out of this comes National Aviation Authority approved organization 31%, qualified entities 26%, notified bodies 3%, and organizations not approved by National Aviation Authority 31%. So one wonders how that can work. What was very clear was that there was a really big interest in having an online tool that would help the operator in establishing a SORA. And as some of you might know, there are a number of tools like this that are being developed or that actually are already available. So SORA is currently used only by a relatively small number of operators. Only 14% of the respondents were qualified to participate in the more detailed ops risk survey. So that gives you an indication of the understanding of SORA by the operators. And only 9% of the respondents have actually completed the ops risk survey. So it's even smaller. SORA has not been translated into any national language by any national aviation authority in the European Union. Now that is significant because it hinders the accessibility of SORA to a significant number of SMEs, SMIs in quite a few countries, because the competence in English is not uniform through all the European countries. So this could lead to inequality for operators in the European countries. Next slide, please. So here we're in the ops risk survey. So this was specific on SORA. We only had 20 operators that qualified to participate in this. Out of them, 75% were commercial operators and 25% non-commercial. When we look at the types of operators, there were 4 different groups of corporate operators and 10% governmental operators. The countries that they came from are indicated there. Nearly the totality of these operators indicated that they were aware of the requirements relative to security, data protection, and privacy, and environmental considerations in their countries. 65% had already drawn up a CONOPS or used national standard scenarios or conducted a SORA. 100% of them, so all of them, were interested in obtaining a LUC. 85% indicated that they were conversant, fluent in English. The quantity that could conduct a SORA for each of their missions was 70%. That could apply ground risk mitigation, 76%, air risk mitigation, 78%, and those that have already used the predefined risk assessment, 25%. Having used European standard scenarios, 10%. But what is a really interesting number are the quantity of drone operators that report incidents, 80% of them. What is also a bit of a frightening thing to learn is that 80% of them cannot detect aircraft in uncontrolled airspace. The other interesting big number that came out is that 80% of the operators indicated using third parties when required by the OSOs to do so. Next, please. Now here are the standards that have been identified, or the origins of the standards that have been identified as being used by these operators. And the difficulties encountered, quite 40% identified difficulties to show compliance with safety objectives due to a lack of standards. I think we all understand that. But 100% encountered difficulties relative to operational safety objectives. 88% had difficulties with strategic mitigations, and 88% also had problems in obtaining technical information on the drone they're using from the producer. 50% did not know up to what sale level their operations are associated, and 50% also did not know up to what sale level they could demonstrate compliance. Next, please. So the conclusions of all of this is that accessing the SORA is slightly problematic because it's only available in English, and that this could create inequality between the operators to access the higher end of the specific operational category. This would be blatant in countries where English is not really mastered, which is, for example, the case in my beloved France here. Accessing the standards has, to a certain extent, the same problematics because they're only available in English, and they're not translated in any EU member state language. This again could create inequality, and the current use of standards is still minimal. Accessing online standard repository. So this is what I'm talking about is the standards information portal that AW drones is producing. That is produced in English only, and again, could create inequality of access to the information supplied amongst the European member states, or the operators in the various European member states. Now, the result of all of this is that the use of independent third parties to conduct SORAs or apply ground risk or air risk mitigation strategies, this is going to grow. The requirement for third-party, independent third parties to do this. And this means that they would take care of the standards. They would they would bring English to the table where the operators don't have the English, and they would clearly fill a role that a lot of the smaller SMEs, SMIs operating drones could not fulfill at the moment. And there's a very keen interest from all for having an online tool to facilitate the safety risk analysis process in general. I think that's the last of it, Damiano. Is there another one? So the concluding remarks. It's very clear that flight missions are going to increase in all market sectors identified by the survey. Principally, the BVLOS missions in the specific category, that is where the operators are aiming their growth. And this also explains why a few of the mission purposes that require less expertise are going to decrease. To make all of this possible and to increase the employment potential, there has to be a better grasp and comprehension of the applicable operational risk analysis methods. The availability and the acceptance of independent third parties and or online tools will be required. The availability and comprehension of the required standards also has to be improved. And the availability of the required technical information from the relevant drone manufacturers, something has to be done there to make this possible. And obviously, the detection of other aircraft in uncontrolled airspace by the operators is a problem at the moment. So, having said all of this, it looks like the Drone Standards Information Portal that is being produced by AW Drones will facilitate the identification of applicable standards, which is going to be very useful to the English-speaking drone operators. I emphasize English. And this will be especially of interest to independent third parties like qualified entities, conformity assessment bodies, notified bodies, which will probably grow in importance for the drone community, the higher end of the drone community. That's it from my side, Damiano.
Thank you very much, Peter. Could you please say a couple of words about the preparatory work for the next survey, the one about U-Space?
Well, the one about U-Space, we have gathered together a group of experts in various areas. These are ANSPs, they're service providers, they're developers of ATM and UTM software, operators, and together with them, based on the information that Andres showed earlier, we are now scoping a survey to get feedback on what is required from the operator's point of view, what is missing, what are the priorities to get all of this off the ground. It's still in the early stages. We hope to have the outline of the survey. By that I mean the chapter headings that will be addressed by the survey, ready by the end of November. We will then start populating the survey with questions coming from all of these sources, and it will then go for discussion with EASA to make sure that we're on track with what we're trying to do. But it's very clearly a reality check of the theoretical part that we have been discussing for so long. Identify where the gaps are, not seen from the regulatory point of view or from the regulator's point of view, but from the operator's point of view. The community that we're all doing this for, and where we should be creating jobs. Do you want more, Damiano?
No, that's okay. Just the timeline. When we expect to spread the survey about USpace?
Okay. Normally, if everything goes according to plan, by the end of March, beginning of April, the survey will be ready. It will be online, and there will be something like up to June. It will be open, and then we will require about a month to interpret the results, draw the results, and then once we have the results, draw the conclusions. So we're looking at having everything available online for anybody who wants it in August 2021.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so finally it's time to dedicate a bit of room to the of space to the questions you made in the questions tab. Okay, maybe you saw that we already tried to answer to most of the questions by written. Nonetheless, there are some interesting questions that we selected among the ones you made, and maybe we have some time now to discuss them with the speakers. Okay, please consider that we made this work during the workshop, so maybe we missed some of the most interesting questions and so, but please remember also that we will give an answer to every single question, even involving the experts, and they will be published on the website. But we have a selection now of questions that maybe could be of interest now. So I will start with the first one we selected. I see this has EASA indicated a timeline when they will publish the official list of standards. Okay, I think that maybe both Nicolas but also Marco, that is in contact with EASA, could answer. Marco told me that he has a good answer from EASA, so maybe he can start, and then if Nicolas has something to add, he could.
Yeah, I just asked Natale Di Rubbo, that is among the attendees. He cannot speak by himself, unfortunately. He told me that they plan to publish an initial list of standards around January 2021, but most of the work will be done during 2021 with an expected publication of a more comprehensive list of standards in the second half of 2021.
Okay, I don't know whether Nicolas has something to add about the timeline, not only about the timeline of the standards, but I don't know if he has something more to share about the timeline also of the regulation and so.
No, not well. In terms of regulation, use-based regulation, as I mentioned, the earliest we could go for a vote in the ESA committee would be beginning of 2021. I believe that what Marco just mentioned in terms of publication of an initial list of standards would relate to drones in general and not use-based in particular. So the EASA just set up the working group on use-based CMCs and guidance material, and that will likely not deliver before some time from now. So the work is only starting there.
Okay, thanks. Then we get pass to the next question. This is an interesting one. Can manned aviation declare themselves as unmanned with a pilot on board and use and rely on new space services? I think that Andrew may help us with the ConOps. Can manned aviation use the services provided by U-Space?
In terms of the ConOps, yes, but you would need to find a service provider who was comfortable with the level of safety that you were relying on them to provide. I think you would need a contract with a service provider where you'd indicated that you were going to do this.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I would like to add something.
Yes,
because
please.
that's something which we also discussed at length with the legal service, and there are some legal issues there. Technically, of course, it would be desirable to have manned aircraft using the same use-space services as UAS in the same airspace. You have a single airspace, you have common rules for all airspace users. That would be easier to deal with, but there are some legal issues there. In terms of air traffic service providers having the exclusive right to provide air traffic services to manned aircraft in controlled airspace, and also the legal basis, which is a more, I would say, an issue in terms of legal drafting. Legal basis, we have to set up rules for use space and for controlled airspace. So at least for the foreseeable future, you're going to have air traffic services provided to manned aircraft, and you have use-space services provided to UAS operators in use-space airspace. I think the only realistic option in the short medium term is to have general aviation in uncontrolled airspace using maybe some of the use-space services on a voluntary basis. Even that is a bit. I mean, from a legal point of view, it's not so easy to address, but from a technical and conceptual point of view, I think that this could be the short to medium term.
Yeah, we will face all of this quite soon when we start to look at urban air mobility. So we have passenger carrying vehicles, and I'm interested to know where legally we end up with that.
Yeah, from a legal point of view, I think an aircraft without a pilot on board is an unmanned aircraft, even if it carries passengers. I think the transition phase is going to be interesting because there we have optionally piloted aircraft or highly automated aircraft where you would not really have a pilot, but more a kind of supervisor sitting in the aircraft. And okay, you may argue it's not terribly different than what happens on some airliners today, but there the pilot would just not touch any button in the nominal case and just, you know, maybe just be there to push the big red button in case something goes wrong. But and then does it mean it's still piloted and manned aircraft, or is it an unmanned aircraft? And therefore, how has it to be considered from a legal point of view? Things to be further.
We need to understand where the liability is. I mean, if the use-based service provider has the full liability of an ANSP, then they will need to have equivalent insurance and qualified systems and qualified staff and so on. So we need to sort this out quite soon, I think.
Okay, thanks. Then we have a very technical question. I will ask to maybe the Unifly colleagues to answer this. For the Common Information Service Provider, a modified asterisk, similar with the military AWCIES, that I don't know, could be taken into account. This is quite technical question, but it's interesting for the project. Maybe Andres has some idea on this. I don't know.
It's good. It's a good input. I don't know AWCIS as well, so it's something we need to look at. If it is, I could be. That's the only thing what I can say. I don't know it as well, so so we'll have a look at it.
Yeah, that's interesting because also give us the opportunity to tell people who is attending that if they look for the database now and in the few weeks later when it will be more complete and correct, and they find that something is missing and something that could be used that they consider useful for the scope, they can suggest us. For the moment, we have not yet implemented the functionality that will be present in the final versions of the portal, that are the possibility to comment and the possibility to interact directly on the portal. For the moment, this is disabled because, as Marco said before, the portal is not yet in its final version, but then it will be possible to comment directly in the standards and in the pages of the portal. For the moment, if you have suggestions or you want to propose something, you can drop us a line, send an email, and we will do our best to manage those requests. Then I have a question. Can we get the questionnaire questions to have a look into the template? I think that this refers to the SORA questionnaire. If I understood wrong, then the author of the question can send me an email and I will try to answer the right question. But in general, Peter, you can make aware people that we will publish a final report of the questionnaire, reporting more or less everything. So if you want to say a couple of words about this.
Well, if I understand correctly, the question was if the questions concerning the SORA can be made available.
Yes, exactly. The content of the questionnaire.
Yes, Damiano, sorry to interrupt. I chatted a bit with the author of the questions to clarify. They want to know if they can have access to the original questionnaires, to the questions, basically, not only the answers.
Well, they should have woken up a little bit earlier. Then they could have participated. If they contact me, I can send them the questionnaire, because now, of course, the survey is offline.
Okay. Okay, but anyway, with the report, we will publish also the full text of the questions.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, okay, the following question is similar, where we can see the market sectors and the flight missions. Okay, they will be published with the report. Okay.
It's all in there.
It's all in there.
But,
okay.
But only in the results and the conclusions, it's all in English.
Okay. Okay, but questions have been made in English, so I'm confident that people will understand. Okay, another question for you, Peter. This is an interesting one. Peter, the survey was answered by operator flying below 500 feet. What's your view about the market above 500 feet?
Well,
in your opinion, the 10 principal flight missions are also applicable to higher altitudes, or it's completely a different market?
It will probably be a different market, because you're not going to be using, in many cases, the same type of sensors. This obviously means that your aircraft, your flying platform is going to be more expensive. It means that the service that you're supplying with it also will be more expensive. Now, let us first, please, get the low-level stuff sorted out. Let people feel comfortable in that and start earning money in that instead of chasing unbelievably bright stars, but that are not reachable. There's a lot of money that can be earned by flying below 500 feet. A lot. And we should try to avoid the temptation to always look for something which is more complicated. Content ourselves with what we can do today. We haven't even started breaking open that market. And hopefully these the new regulations will make this possible. But this is a typical engineer question. They always want to do the difficult things.
Okay, maybe you are close with the profession, but okay. No, I understand the sense of the question, and
maybe a remark on that one. I think that well, the current or the regulatory framework that is going to enter into force by the end of the year is going to ease operations below 500 feet. I think that going above is indeed in the current situation going to be more complex. I would just like to make two remarks there. First, use space is not explicitly limited to 500 feet. So should a member state decide to reserve a piece of airspace for use space operations a bit bigger than below 500 feet, there's nothing that prevents the member states from doing that. Of course, then you would have to make sure that you don't have manned traffic entering or needing to enter that airspace on a regular basis. Otherwise, it defeats a bit the purpose of extending use space airspace. The second thing is that some operators are still planning to operate in controlled airspace with certified aircraft. So it is, of course, more costly. It is more complex. But some transport type operations, including passenger transport type operations with unmanned aircraft, are clearly going to start in controlled airspace with the support of ATC, and are likely not going to happen in very low level airspace because it's just not economical to do so. I mean, if you look at what Lilium is trying to do and establish connections between transport hubs or different cities, that's not something you can do by just flying all the time below 500 feet. You have to fly higher.
Okay, thank you. Then that's a question that we partially answered already during the presentations, but maybe it could be an occasion to remark something. So, what is the view on electronic conspicuity for manned aviation flying in class Gulf airspace without a transponder, as an example? Does the sharing of surveillance data fall under the responsibility of the ANSP that is monitoring that sector? So I think that here the question regards the fact that there may be an intersection between the class Gulf and the use space, I think. So we already said something. Maybe Andrew or Nicolas want to add something on this.
We in the ConOps foresaw the widespread use of electronic conspicuity. It's the only way that the drone has any hope of detecting the aircraft until it's right on top of the drone. So if you want to achieve the dream of the manned aviation community was that their drones would magically all just get out of the way and they would never even be aware that they were flying. But that requires that the drones know about them a reasonable time in advance. So in the ConOps, we foresaw the widespread use of this, but that was research work. Over to Nicolas for a clearer answer.
Well, the draft regulatory framework puts an obligation on the operator, the general aviation airspace user, sorry, to be electronically conspicuous in a way that is detectable or usable by the airspace service providers. So again, material AMCs will have to be developed there. There is no obligation for air traffic service providers to maintain a surveillance coverage down to the ground in that airspace airspace. We are looking at other options. There's no implicit or explicit obligation on the air traffic service providers to provide that surveillance coverage in the airspace airspace.
It might be worth remembering that FLAM became widespread use in gliding, for example, in France, due to insurance costs rather than a legal mandate.
And interestingly, the feedback we got from the general aviation community on that particular topic was rather positive. So they were not opposed. I mean, they understood the need for electronic conspicuity from a safety point of view, and they were satisfied that we took for the time being a very hands-off and performance-based approach, and they are quite supportive of that aspect. So that's one area where we could have expected a backslash from some stakeholders, and it hasn't happened for the time being.
Perfect. So you answered also another question that says, did you run into objection from manned aviation that didn't want to install FLARM or another system? Looks like not.
Grégoire from Delair. Sorry.
Yes, please.
I have a question. What about paraglider community?
I don't know whether FLARM is also spread among paragliders. Nicolas, maybe you have more information about this.
Well, this gets a bit more technical. I think in principle, unmanned aviation activity in airspace airspace in uncontrolled airspace would be subject to that mandate. So I guess this would apply to paragliders as well. Now, of course, I understand that for such unpowered aircraft, the challenges of carrying devices is even bigger, because they would have to be battery powered and portable and lightweight and low power to remain safe for the pilot, I guess. So, but this is not, I guess, not out of the question, and there might be technical solutions that are adapted. I think that maybe one of the options could also be to have a smartphone and an app on the smartphone, and this is not ruled out. And the drones that are going to operate in new space are expected to be connected all the time to the internet, or at least to the new space service providers through the internet, either through cellular connectivity or satellite connectivity in more remote areas, but I guess it's going to be cellular connectivity first and foremost. It's conceivable that paragliders would just have a smartphone in their pocket with an app that basically only transmits their position and identification to the airspace service providers active in that airspace.
Thank you. Okay, then there is a question that I can answer myself. What happens to the portal after the end of the AW drones project? Will it die after the standard 3 years? The standard 3 years are the years that are usually a European project sign a contract where they state that the website will be maintained for at least 2 or 3 years after the end of the project. No, it's not the case. It will not die after the end of the project, because it would be definitely a failure. So, okay, we will keep it for sure for the standard 3 years, but our objective is to keep it alive for decades since now. So don't care, you will not waste time in learning how it works. You can put it in your bookmarks because we will not abandon it in the next 3 years. So for sure you can expect that we will stay online for years. Okay. And I have a question here that is also interesting about the scope of AW drones. It is written here that let me, it's a long question, but I need to enlarge a bit the screen. Okay, I understand that AW drones is not assessing the technical content of the standards that are identified. That might be an issue. For example, the high potential ASTM standard on remote ID is about security and not safety. That should be the main driver of requirements for use-based services. Okay, maybe Marco has something to say here because it's something
Yeah, I can take this. We did not explicitly mention that in our assessment process, we are never questioning the technical quality of the standards. So we are always assuming that if a standard development organization has published a standard, this is absolutely fulfilling the scope for which it has been developed. This doesn't mean that we are not looking into the technical content, but we are looking into the technical content only with the objective of assessing whether a standard is able to support the demonstration of compliance towards a regulatory requirement. So we are looking into the technical content, we are not questioning it. So this aspect about the ASTM standard will be definitely taken into account.
If you allow, I can add to that. I think it was the question was more on Andres' presentation here.
Oh.
I think the remote ID and the identification are something complementing each other. So the statement may be to say that's the most relevant standard for use base did not fully answer this question and did not fully address that. So there is a complementarity of these two standards, and the one is indeed the remote ID addressing the security perspective, while the e-identification is more going to the services of use base already. So maybe we have a discussion on that before you move on to that we discuss a little bit the content of the of the standard, and they were coordinated in this matter. So that makes sense here.
Okay, so on this specific aspect of that standard, I leave this to Andres to comment if he wants to.
Yeah, so the question, I think it's a valid point, but I think we're still assessing the standard itself. So looking at safety, I'm not really let's say understanding the question entirely. So you say if I correct me if I'm wrong, but your question or your comment, let's say, is more related that the ASTM standard is really security focused, not safety focused. Is that correct?
It wasn't my question. I tried to answer it itself, but it was more in this direction.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, and that was the initial idea, and that was also the way ASTM and the FAA has presented that at ICAO level.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the question was made by Alan, and we can contact him and talk about this also in the next days. So thank you for the question. This is another question. This is interesting also. Apparently, there are more use-based services in the SESAR roadmap than in the regulatory proposal. Are they going to be aligned? Nicolas, do you agree with this? There are more use-based services in SESAR than in the regulatory roadmap?
Yes, I think that, I mean, they are not necessarily fully aligned. And if you look at the flight authorization service that is defined in the current draft regulation, it does actually address a strategic deconfliction. So you may consider that, and you could also argue it's part of the flight planning and flight support services. So depending on how you define them and what is the content, some of the services in the draft regulatory framework may cover one or more in the CESAR roadmap. In the regulatory framework, we have defined what we think is the absolute minimum we need to harmonize, and what we think would be required or could be required by the member states in a piece of airspace. In the current state of play, there's no intention to widen that. So it does not prevent, of course, use-based service providers from providing additional services, but the regulatory framework focuses on what we think is necessary to harmonize for the safe operations in use-based airspace. And it's also, again, only an initial step. It's aimed at facilitating or enabling initial implementation of use-based. So further revision of the rule could come with more services for more advanced operations, but that's undecided for the time being.
Okay, thank you. Marco, maybe in the meantime, some other interesting question may have been arrived, because I was dealing with the list. Maybe I missed something, otherwise, I don't know. We have actually a lot of questions, so not so much time. So
let's see what else we have.
Yes, in the meantime, Marco, while you do a final check for the questions, I have a very last thing to show. That is this one. Okay. I'll show you my screen. Okay. So this is, sorry, the next steps of the project and the things that we are going to deliver. So the full data upload and validation of the drone standard information portal will follow before the end of the year. So if you go now to standards.awdrones.eu, and it's easy reachable also from the website, you will see that that's a big disclaimer at the beginning saying that not all the data have been uploaded and validated. So it's a work that we are doing in parallel, but we wanted anyway to release the portal to collect also the feedback of the community about this. So then the publication of the meta standards for the use space will be at the end of the year as an official delivery to the Commission, but then there will need some time to be reviewed and then eventually accepted. And so we will publish it in the beginning of 2021. As said by Peter, the survey, the next survey on use space, and it will be a pleasure for us if you would like to be involved in this. We will give a full coverage to this. So if you follow us on the social networks and so on, you will be informed as soon as it will be out in the spring of 2021. We are still a bit negotiating the scope of the last year of the
I think we lost Damiano.
Yeah, Damiano was frozen.
Yeah, so maybe I can go ahead with what he was saying. So we are going to finalize. So Damiano, we lost you for the last minutes.
Okay, okay. From where?
From the scope of next year.
Okay, then the scope of next year will be is still under negotiation, but it will cover for sure the certification specification for light US, so mainly airworthiness for light US, and the final the report about this will be published at the end of next year. And the end of next year will also be the official end of the project. So the final event and the project closure will follow at the end of next year. So more or less 1 year from now. But as said before, the drone standards information portal will be anyway continued, that it will not die after the end of the project, also beyond the 2 or 3 years that are the normal time frame for maintaining the website of an European project. So there's a lot of stuff to do. There are a lot of things yet to be published. So stay tuned. We gave you all the contacts. You will receive also an email from Vera after the end of the workshop asking you to express feedback about the event of today, and you're willing to be contacted further for other events like this. So from our side, it's more or less all. So we thank you a lot. Here are once again our contacts. In the meantime, maybe Marco found a couple of other questions, or otherwise we will work them in the back end and provide a list on the website. Marco, did you find something?
Yeah, maybe just one last question that could
Yeah.
be of interest, also
Sure.
considering what Peter presented just a few minutes ago. There is a question about the recognition of independent third parties in the context of SORA. So the question is, what are the plans in terms of listing these independent third parties, or in terms of defining implementing regulation for qualified entities? So I don't know if Nicolas can answer this, because the person that asked this question is saying that CAA, they do not accept third parties without a recognition to support SORA. So how is this going to work?
It's a good question. I think that's something to be answered by EASA. I am not a SORA expert myself. And I know there's some ongoing discussions on the designation of qualified entities. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether we can provide an answer offline.
Yeah, okay.
One second, if I may, Nicolas, 1 second. In the expert group on drones at commission level, on a question by EUSCG Netherlands, your colleague responded that, like it is normal practice in the European legal order, national authorities may already accredit qualified entities based on Article 69 of the basic regulation, even in the absence of common rules. Later, once we will have common rules, there will be a transition like it is usual in any implementing rules. So I would kindly pay you to check it not with the EASA, but inside DG Move, because this is a legal issue. And in the case I am right, the Commission kindly publish this some way, so every CAA will know. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anyway, sorry, who's speaking?
Sorry, I was just saying thank you and point taken.
Okay. Okay, so for the remaining questions, if you made a question and you have been answered, or you haven't been answered, or the answer was short, anyway, we'll rework them a bit and we will publish them on the website. For sure, your name will be cancelled, so don't worry, we will not disclose your details. And okay, that's all from our side. So please stay tuned. I want to thank a lot both the speakers, the organizers, Vera, a lot for all her effort. for sure all the participants. Thank you very much. Stay tuned, and we hope to have given you a good service with this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Damiano. Thank you very much, everybody. Well done.
Thanks, Vladimir. Bye bye.